Welcome to Midnight Fatal Cases. What you're about to hear is true crime. No legends. No exaggeration. No fiction. This is a real case about a real woman, and a decision that was made calmly, deliberately, and without hesitation. A farm. A relationship that looked ordinary from the outside. And a man who believed the environment around him could erase what he did. This is, he left the girl to be eaten by pigs. Everything you're about to hear happened to real people. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Hook. There are places where sound travels differently. Out on flat farmland, miles from the nearest streetlight, you can hear a gate latch click from across a field. You can hear an engine being cut. You can hear an animal settle down in straw, the soft shuffle like someone turning over in bed. And if you stand close enough to a hog barn at night, you can hear something else. Not words, not screaming, nothing that clean. Just a low, constant movement, a wet rhythm, the steady insistence of hunger. This story begins with a call that should have been routine. A welfare check, a missing person, a young woman who didn't show up for work, didn't answer her phone, and didn't come home. The kind of disappearance that, at first, gets explained away with simple ideas. A fight, a spontaneous drive, a dead phone. But the person who called it in wasn't a co-worker or a landlord. It was the woman's sister, and she did not sound uncertain. She sounded like someone who'd already been rehearsing grief. The dispatcher wrote it down in a small county office, in a building that smelled like coffee and printer paper. The deputy assigned to it had a short shift left, a list of paperwork to finish, and a mind already half on dinner. He listened anyway. He heard the same detail twice. "The farm," the sister said. "He lives at the farm. She went there." The deputy drove with his window cracked, not because it was hot, but because the air inside his car felt stale. Dusk was settling in, and the road was turning the color of old metal. Cornfields rose on either side like walls. He had done welfare checks before. Usually they ended with a sheepish apology. A person asleep with their phone on silent. A couple mid-argument who didn't want the neighbors involved. Sometimes something sad but ordinary. An overdose. A fall. This one did not feel ordinary. It wasn't anything the dispatcher said. It was the silence in the background of the call, the way the sister spoke as if she was afraid of being overheard, even though she was miles away. He turned off the main road and followed a gravel lane that seemed to go nowhere. The dust lifted behind him in a pale cloud, then fell back down in slow sheets. There were no houses close by, only the occasional mailbox and a stand of trees that looked like it had been planted to hide what was beyond it. When he saw the property, he understood why the sister's voice had tightened. The farm sat low and dark, a farmhouse with a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Two long barns set back behind it, the kind built for function, not beauty. A lean-to, a row of rusted equipment, and a line of fencing that disappeared into weeds. A security light above one of the barn doors flickered, not quite dying, not quite working. It threw a nervous pulse across the yard. The deputy parked and stepped out. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not manure. Not exactly. Manure was honest. This was layered. Sour feed, damp earth, the sharp bite of disinfectant that farms used when they wanted to pretend everything was clean. And under that, something he could not name, but his body recognized. He walked toward the porch and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder, and waited long enough to hear his own breathing. Still nothing. He glanced at the windows. The curtains were open. The living room was visible but dark. No television glow. No movement. No sign that anyone had been interrupted. He walked off the porch and circled toward the barns. As he got closer, the sound rose to meet him. A restless chorus, snorts and thuds, and the metallic clank of animals shifting against metal rails. Hogs. A lot of them. There's a particular kind of noise pigs make when they're not settled. It isn't panic. It's agitation. It's the way a crowd sounds when something is happening, but you can't see what it is. He stopped at the first barn door. There was a padlock, but it hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze like a small warning. He didn't go inside right away. He stood there and listened. From somewhere farther back, past the first barn, he heard another sound, a faint mechanical whir, like a fan or a pump running steadily. It wasn't loud, but it was consistent, and consistency at a place like this meant someone had set it and left it. He keyed his radio and gave his location, a calm voice used to making calm reports. Then he walked deeper into the yard. Near the second barn, he saw something on the ground. At first it looked like trash. A dark shape against dirt, something dropped in haste. A jacket maybe, or a bag. He crouched and picked it up carefully. It was a phone. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but the case was intact, and the battery was still warm, as if it hadn't been lying there long. The background photo was visible beneath the cracks. A smiling young woman, her head tilted slightly, sunlight in her hair. He stared at it for a moment longer than he meant to. Then he stood up, and that was when he noticed the shoe. Just one. A flat, casual shoe, the kind someone wears when they're not planning to walk through mud. It was lying near the edge of the gravel, half in a puddle, as if it had been stepped out of. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The farm wasn't just quiet. It was staged, as if something had been moved quickly, and not everything had been remembered. He looked toward the hog enclosure. The fencing wasn't far from the second barn, and beyond it was a pen that sloped slightly downward. The ground there was churned and uneven. There were troughs, a water line, and the indistinct mass of animals pressing toward the far side, bodies leaning against each other like they were crowding for warmth. But it wasn't cold. It was the wrong kind of crowding. The deputy took 2 steps closer and stopped again. Because as he approached, the pigs moved in a wave that didn't make sense. They shifted away from the fence line, then turned back, then shifted again, as if they were following something moving on the other side of the pen. Or reacting to something that had fallen. He swallowed. His mouth had gone dry. He told himself firmly that animals do strange things. They spook. They swarm. They get territorial around food. And yet, he could not stop looking at the ground near the far corner, where the dirt was darker, damp, and trampled down into a slick patch. He could not stop thinking about the phone in his hand. He backed away from the pen, slowly, as if sudden motion might invite attention. He walked back toward the barn door with the open padlock. This time he pushed it and stepped inside. The air in the barn was warmer than outside and heavy with moisture. A row of pens ran along both sides, metal bars slick with use. The hogs inside pressed their faces forward, snouts wet, eyes small and watchful. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them strobing faintly. At the far end, a narrow hallway led to a small room where feed and supplies were kept. He saw fresh boot prints in the straw, deep enough to show weight. He followed them without thinking, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the gloom. The supply room door was open. Inside, there was a sink with a hose attached, and on the concrete floor beneath it, a wide stain that had been scrubbed too recently, too aggressively, leaving the surface darker in irregular swirls. A plastic bin sat nearby with cleaning rags and a bottle of industrial disinfectant. The cap was off. The smell was sharp enough to sting his eyes. On a hook by the door hung a set of coveralls. They were wet at the cuffs, as if they'd been washed in a hurry and hung up to drip. He stood there, letting the details settle in his mind like sediment in a glass of water. Phone, shoe, open padlock, fresh boot prints, disinfectant, and an empty farmhouse. He did not yet know the young woman's name, not officially. He only knew the sister had said it twice, and the way she said it had made it feel like a prayer. The deputy stepped back out into the yard, the night closing around him. He looked at the house again, at the dark windows, at the porch that didn't creak because no one was moving across it. Then he looked at the hog pen. The pigs were still restless, still shifting, still making that low, constant sound. He reached for his radio and spoke, the calmness in his voice now deliberate, forced. "I'm going to need another unit out here," he said. "And I want a supervisor. Now." A pause crackled back, the dispatcher's voice suddenly sharper. "Copy." He lowered the radio and listened to the farm again. In the distance, beyond the barns, a coyote called once, then went silent. The deputy stood alone in a yard full of animals and machinery and a smell that wouldn't leave his throat. He stared at the pen and tried not to imagine what the sister had already imagined. Because on a farm, things disappear all the time. A chicken gets taken. A calf dies overnight. A tool goes missing, then turns up weeks later in tall grass. But people don't vanish without leaving a shape behind. And on this farm, the shape was everywhere. It was in the cracked phone still warm. It was in the single shoe, abandoned like a sentence cut off mid-word. And it was in the way the hogs would not settle, as if they were waiting for something else. If someone wanted to erase a person out here, the land offered 100 methods. Water, fire, metal, time. And the animals, always hungry, would never ask questions. The deputy knew that. Every farmer knew that. He also knew something else, something he couldn't put into a report. That the longer he stood listening to that pen, the more the sound stopped being just sound. It started to feel like a decision that had already been made. And whatever that decision was, it was going to be written into the dirt, into the straw, into the careful scrub marks on concrete. Evidence doesn't always look like a weapon. Sometimes it looks like a phone dropped in haste. Sometimes it looks like a door left unlocked. Sometimes it sounds like animals that won't settle down. And sometimes it begins with a sister who refuses to accept silence as an answer. Chapter 2, Context and People. Her name was Maya Hart, 26 years old. Not a headline name. Not someone with a public following, not someone who collected attention. The kind of person who can move through a town and be remembered for small things instead of big ones. The way she always returned shopping carts, even in rain. The way she spoke softly to children, even when they weren't hers. The way she flinched when someone raised their voice in a room that was otherwise calm. Maya lived in a rented duplex on the edge of a county seat that had one main street, one grocery store, and a bar that still had the same neon sign it had carried since the 1980s. She shared the place with her older sister, Elena, and an elderly cat that slept like it was tired of the world. Elena was 31 and practical in a way that sometimes sounded like anger. She worked at a dental office, paid bills on time, and didn't let life surprise her if she could help it. People described her as intense, which was a polite way of saying she paid attention. Maya didn't mind that. She liked being watched over even when she joked about it. On weeknights, their routines were small and reliable. Elena cooking pasta while Maya chopped vegetables. A streaming show running in the background, more noise than entertainment. Sometimes they sat on the porch steps with mugs of tea, watching cars pass, making quiet guesses about where each one was going. It was a good life. Not perfect, but stable. And stability matters, because when someone disappears, you have to start by asking a simple question. What did they leave behind? Maya didn't leave behind chaos. She left behind an unfinished load of laundry, half folded on the couch. She left behind a planner with neat handwriting, reminders circled in blue ink. She left behind a voicemail to her supervisor saying she'd be on time. Said in that careful, polite tone she used when she didn't want to be an inconvenience. And she left behind a relationship that had been changing shape for months, quietly, like a bruise darkening under skin. His name was Graham Keller. He was 34. He had grown up on the same land where the deputy now stood, a farm that belonged to his family for generations, back when the county was more trees than fields. People in town described Graham in sentences that never quite landed. Hard worker. Private. Doesn't say much. Kind of intense, but he means well. He was the sort of man you could know for years and still not feel like you knew him. He showed up at church on holidays. He paid his tab. He nodded to people on the street. He had that local reputation that floats just above suspicion, not because someone is loved, but because they are familiar. Maya met him at a fundraiser dinner held in the community center. Folding chairs, overcooked chicken, an auction of donated gift baskets that nobody really wanted but everybody bid on anyway. Elena had dragged Maya there, telling her she needed to get out of her head. Maya had laughed and gone, wearing a simple black dress and a cardigan she kept pulling closed, like she didn't trust the room. Graham was there with an older man from the feed supply store. They stood near the coffee urn, watching the crowd the way people watch weather. When Maya reached for sugar packets, her elbow brushed Graham's arm, and she apologized quickly, too quickly. Graham turned and said, "It's fine." His voice was low, flat. Not warm, not cold. Just controlled. Maya smiled anyway. She had that reflex, smooth the edges, keep things pleasant. They spoke for maybe 5 minutes. About the auction. About the cold snap coming. About how the town never changed. It shouldn't have mattered. But later, on the drive home, Maya said, "He seemed steady." Elena had kept her eyes on the road and answered, "Steady isn't always safe." At the time, it sounded like a sister's skepticism, the protective kind that comes with sharing a roof. But Elena's mind held on to details, and in the weeks that followed, she began collecting them without meaning to. The first date happened fast. Coffee at a diner. Then dinner at a small restaurant where the menus were laminated. Graham paid. Maya thanked him too much. He looked uncomfortable when the waitress asked if they wanted dessert. After that, the dates moved away from public places. A drive out to the farm to see the animals. A walk along the property line. A beer on the porch while Graham pointed out where he wanted to put a new shed someday. Maya started coming home later. Not very late, but later than before. Her hair smelled like straw and cold wind. She would shower immediately, as if she wanted the farm off her skin. Elena asked questions in the kitchen while pretending she didn't care. "How was it?" "Fine." "Did you eat?" "Yeah." "Did he come inside?" "No." That answer stayed consistent for months. No, Graham never came into the duplex. He never met Elena properly. He waved once from the driveway when he dropped Maya off, then drove away before Elena could step outside. To some people, that would have sounded respectful. To Elena, it sounded like avoidance. Maya's friends noticed changes too, but they described them gently, the way you describe weather turning. Maya used to answer texts quickly. Then she started leaving people on read. Maya used to post pictures of her weekend hikes. Then her account went quiet. Maya used to laugh loudly when something was funny. Then she began laughing with her mouth closed, like she was trying not to take up space. When Elena asked what was going on, Maya said, "It's nothing. He's just particular." Particular. That word can cover a lot. Particular about his routine. Particular about privacy. Particular about who knew what. Maya told Elena that Graham didn't like people knowing his business, that he got anxious when he felt judged, that the farm was stressful, and he didn't want outsiders around to comment on it. Elena asked, "So what does that make you?" Maya blinked and said, "What do you mean?" Elena didn't push. Not yet. She had learned the hard way that pushing too early makes people retreat. So she stayed close instead. She watched. She listened for what Maya didn't say, and there were things Maya didn't say. Like why she stopped wearing a necklace their mother had given her. Like why she began turning her phone face down on the table whenever it buzzed. Like why she started checking the locks twice before bed. Sometimes, late at night, Elena would wake up and hear Maya moving around in the kitchen, the soft click of a cabinet, the sigh of a refrigerator door. When Elena stepped out, Maya would be standing there drinking water as if she'd just run a mile. "You okay?" Elena would ask. "Yeah," Maya would say. "Just couldn't sleep." And Elena would notice Maya's hands. The way she rubbed her thumbs against her fingers over and over like she was trying to erase a feeling. On paper, Graham Keller looked fine. He owned land. He had equipment. He did business with local suppliers. There were no public scandals. No arrest record that anyone in town talked about. He was, in the language people like to use, a known quantity. But Elena had grown up with a father who drank and smiled and never hit anyone where strangers could see. She understood that a person can be known and still be hidden. The more Maya tried to make Graham sound harmless, the more Elena's concern sharpened. Then there was the shift that Elena couldn't ignore. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Maya came home from work and went straight to the bathroom. Elena heard the water run. Then it stopped. Then it ran again. When Maya finally came out, her eyes were red, not from crying exactly, but from holding something back. Elena asked, "Did something happen?" Maya hesitated, and for a moment it looked like she might tell the truth. Her face had that strained openness of someone standing at the edge of a confession. Then her phone buzzed. Maya glanced at it and the openness shut like a door. "It's nothing," she said. "Just tired." Elena watched her thumbs start that rubbing motion again. Later, when Maya was asleep, Elena did something she hated herself for. She picked up Maya's phone from the charger on the counter. She didn't know the passcode. She didn't try to break it. She only looked at the lock screen notifications, the tiny previews that appeared before fading out. There were messages from Graham, a lot of them. Short, commanding. Time stamped close together. "Where are you? Answer me. Don't ignore me." Elena put the phone down and stood in the kitchen, feeling the old, familiar cold in her chest. Control doesn't begin with bruises. It begins with ownership. The next weekend, Elena insisted on meeting Graham. She didn't announce it as a demand. She framed it as something casual. "Tell him to come by," she said, pouring coffee. "I just want to say hello. I'm your sister, not the police." Maya smiled weakly and promised she would. Graham never came. Instead, Maya left earlier than usual on Sunday morning, saying Graham needed help with something on the property. She wore jeans, boots, and a thick coat. She packed a small bag with an extra shirt, which Elena found odd. "You staying out there?" Elena asked. "Maybe. He wants to start early tomorrow. It's just easier." Elena watched her sister zip the bag. "Why do you need an extra shirt?" Maya paused, then shrugged. "It gets messy." Elena's eyes held on hers. "Maya," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Maya's throat moved as she swallowed. "I'm fine," she said, but the words sounded memorized. She kissed Elena on the cheek, the way she always did when she was trying to make things normal. Then she walked out the door. Elena watched from the window as Graham's truck sat at the curb, engine running. Maya climbed in quickly. The truck pulled away without hesitation, as if lingering was dangerous. The rest of the day, Elena tried not to spiral. She cleaned. She worked on bills. She called their aunt and talked about nothing. Every hour she checked her phone. Maya didn't text. That was unusual but not unheard of. Elena told herself she was overreacting. She told herself Maya was busy. She told herself that control can make people quiet, and quiet can look like peace if you squint. Night came. No text. Elena sent a message. "You home tonight?" No reply. At midnight, Elena called. It rang until voicemail. Elena slept in fragments, waking up to check the time, waking up to stare at the ceiling, waking up to the sound of her own thoughts. Morning came. Maya was still gone. Elena called again. Texted again. Then she called Maya's workplace and tried to sound casual. "Hey," she said, forcing a laugh. "Have you seen Maya this morning? She left something at home." The supervisor paused. "She didn't come in," the woman said. "We thought she might be sick." Elena thanked her and hung up, her hands suddenly shaking. This was the moment when maybe became no. Maya would have called if she was sick. Maya would have texted if she was staying out. Maya would not have vanished without leaving words behind. Elena drove past the farm once that morning and didn't stop. She told herself she didn't want to look like the jealous sister. She told herself she didn't want to make Graham angry. Even that thought, the fear of making him angry, told her more than she wanted to know. At noon, she drove again, slower this time. Graham's truck was there, but the farmhouse curtains were closed. And no one came out. Elena didn't knock. She sat in her car and watched. After 10 minutes, she pulled away and went straight to the sheriff's office. When the dispatcher asked, "When did you last see her?" Elena answered without thinking. "Yesterday," she said. "And I think he's done something." The dispatcher asked for details, but Elena's mind snagged on one image. Maya zipping that small bag like she knew she might need to change. As if she expected a mess. By the time the deputy arrived at the farm that evening, Elena was sitting in the waiting area with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at a wall poster about domestic violence that looked like it had been printed decades ago. A receptionist offered her water. Elena didn't drink it. She listened to radios crackle behind closed doors. She watched people walk past with files in their arms. She tried to keep her breathing even, and all the while, she kept thinking about one word Maya had used. Particular. Because particular can mean neat. It can mean cautious. It can mean shy, but in the wrong hands, particular means rules. And rules mean consequences. Elena didn't know yet what had happened on the farm. She only knew that Maya had walked into Graham Keller's world, and that world had doors that closed quietly behind you. Sometimes that's how it starts. Not with a scream, with a routine, with a rule. With a woman who stops posting photos, stops laughing loudly, stops answering messages. With a sister who realizes too late that fine has become a code word for fear. And with a farm that sits out on gravel roads, where sound travels differently, and where, if someone makes a choice in the dark, the land has a way of swallowing it. Chapter 3. Escalation. By the time the second unit arrived at Keller Farm, the sky had gone fully black. Headlights swept across the yard in slow arcs. The beams caught on wire fencing, on metal gates, on the pale flare of dust still hanging in the air. The first deputy, Deputy Nolan Price, stood near his cruiser with Maya Hart's phone sealed in an evidence bag, as if the thin plastic could keep the feeling off his hands. The supervisor who pulled in behind him was Sergeant Tessa Marlowe, 43, hair pulled back, voice steady, the kind of calm that didn't come from optimism. She stepped out, scanned the property, and didn't waste time asking how Nolan felt about any of it. She asked what he had. Nolan showed her the phone, the shoe, the open padlock, the supply room with the scrubbed concrete. Marlowe didn't react outwardly, but her eyes stayed on the barn doors longer than they needed to. "You see anyone?" she asked. "No," Nolan said. "House is dark." No answer at the door. Marlowe looked past him toward the second barn and the pen line. The hogs were still restless. They were loud enough now that the sound didn't feel like background. It felt like presence. "Okay," she said. "We do this right. We do not wander. We document. We treat it like a scene." Her radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed what they already knew. Maya's phone had last pinged in town the evening before, then again on the highway toward the farm. After that, nothing. No further location. No outgoing calls. Marlowe nodded once, as if the data only underlined what her instincts had already told her. They started at the house. The porch steps groaned when Marlowe climbed them. She knocked hard, then announced herself. "Sheriff's office." Her voice carried into the farmhouse and came back empty. Nolan tried the handle. Unlocked. Marlowe paused. Her gaze cut to him. An unlocked door on a rural property wasn't unheard of. Some people did it out of habit, out of arrogance, out of faith that nobody would cross a long gravel lane just to cause trouble. But Nolan had already seen the padlock hanging open. Unlocked doors didn't mean welcoming. Sometimes they meant someone had left in a hurry. Or someone wanted the place to look unbothered. Marlowe drew her flashlight, angled it low, and stepped inside. The house smelled stale. Not the warm, lived-in kind of stale, but the kind that gathers when a place is used like a shelter, not a home. Old coffee grounds, damp boots, a faint chemical tang drifting in from the barns. The living room was tidy in a way that didn't feel natural. Couch cushions squared, remote controls lined up. No blankets. No clutter. A calendar on the wall with a feed store logo, the days marked with blunt, practical notes, VET. Supply run. Fence. No mention of Maya. In the kitchen, there were 2 plates drying on a rack. 2 mugs. A pot on the stove scrubbed clean. The sink itself was clean too, but there was a faint ring where something had been rinsed hastily. Marlowe moved with the patience of someone who understood that panic destroys evidence. She opened the refrigerator. Half empty. Milk, eggs, a package of raw meat. Nothing unusual. She checked the trash. Inside, she found paper towels stiff with dried brown stains. Nolan's throat tightened. He didn't say anything, but Marlowe saw him freeze, and she held up one gloved hand as if to tell his body to stay quiet. She photographed it. Bagged it. Labeled it. Upstairs, the bedrooms were spare. One room held a twin bed with a work blanket folded at the foot. Another had a queen bed with gray sheets pulled tight. A man's boots by the door. A woman's boots beside them, smaller, cleaner, and still flecked with mud like someone had tried to wipe them and given up. Nolan stared at those boots. "Could be old," he said, but his voice didn't convince him. Marlo didn't answer. She opened a dresser drawer and found women's clothing folded precisely. Jeans, t-shirts, underwear, a hairbrush with strands of light brown hair caught in it. Maya's hair, Elena had said, was light brown. It held sunlight when it was loose. Marlo took pictures. She didn't touch the brush. On the nightstand was a paperback romance novel with a bookmark halfway through. Beside it, a small bottle of melatonin gummies. A receipt from a gas station dated 2 days earlier. Signs of a person. Not a person who planned to vanish. In the bathroom, Marlo found a toothbrush still wet. A tube of mascara on the counter. A smear of foundation on a towel. Recent, Marlo said quietly. Not to Nolan, but to herself. A note for her own brain. They went back downstairs. Nolan's radio buzzed with Elena's name. She'd called again, asking if they had found anything. Dispatch told her to stay by the phone. Nolan pictured her in that waiting area, arms tight around herself, and he felt the pressure of time like a hand between his shoulder blades. Marlo stepped outside and stood in the yard. She turned slowly, taking it all in. Farmhouses tell the truth in small ways. A porch light left on or not. A driveway that looks used or abandoned. A dog barking at strangers or no dog at all. There was no dog here. Nolan hadn't noticed that until Marlo's silence made him notice everything. "Where's Keller?" Marlo asked. Nolan shook his head. Marlo turned toward the barns. "Then we find him," she said. They did not enter the hog barn again immediately. Instead, Marlo called for a third unit, then requested a K-9 handler from the next county over. It would take time. Rural resources moved like molasses. So while they waited, she did what experienced investigators do. She looked for the human signs. Tire tracks in the dirt, fresh and angled as if a vehicle had reversed quickly. A scrape mark along one of the gates, shiny metal where paint had been shaved away. A patch of grass pressed flat beside the lean-to, like someone had knelt there. Near the equipment shed, half hidden behind a stack of feed bags, was a small pile of clothing. Not folded, not thrown. Placed. A denim jacket, a sweater, a scarf. Nolan recognized the scarf immediately, because Elena had described it. Dark green, woven, a gift their mother had knitted before she died. Marlo didn't let him touch it. She photographed it, then bagged it. Nolan's stomach rolled. Clothing left behind was never neutral. Clothing left behind meant a separation that wasn't chosen. They were still processing the yard when headlights appeared on the gravel lane. A pickup truck, slow at first, then stopping short when it saw the cruisers. For a second, nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Graham Keller. He was taller than Nolan had imagined, built heavy through the shoulders like someone who lifted feed sacks without thinking. He wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and boots. His face was sharp, almost handsome, but his eyes were flat in a way that made it hard to imagine warmth behind them. He held his hands out slightly as he approached, palms visible. "What's going on?" he called, voice even. Not confused. Not angry. Controlled. Marlo walked forward, meeting him halfway. "Graham Keller?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Who's asking?" "Sergeant Marlo. Sheriff's office. We're here looking for Maya Hart." Graham's expression flickered, a small crease between his brows, then smoothed back out. "Maya's not here," he said. "She left." "When did she leave?" Marlo asked. "Yesterday," Graham said. "Late afternoon." We argued. She stormed off. "Stormed off," Marlo repeated, letting the phrase hang. Graham shrugged like it was inconvenient. "She does that. She gets dramatic." Nolan watched the way he said it. Not with anger. With dismissal. Like Maya was a problem to manage, not a person to worry about. Marlo asked where he had been. Graham didn't hesitate. "Out checking fence lines. Then I went into town for supplies. Been gone a few hours." Marlo nodded, as if the answer had weight, but not certainty. "You didn't see the cruisers when you left?" she asked. Graham's eyes shifted for the first time, just slightly. "I took the back lane. Didn't come by the house." Marlo asked if Maya had her phone when she left. Graham blinked once. "Yeah." "I think so." Marlo asked if Maya took a bag. Graham's eyes narrowed. "No." It was a clean answer. Too clean. Marlowe's posture didn't change, but Nolan saw it. The moment she placed Graham into a different category, not a boyfriend caught in a bad night, a subject with something to hide. Marlowe told Graham they needed to look around the property for Maya. Standard procedure, she said. Safety. Graham's jaw tightened. You can't just, he began. We can, Marlowe said, voice calm but firm. We already have reason to be here. Personal items in the yard, a missing person report. You can cooperate or you can make this harder on yourself. For the first time, anger flashed across Graham's face. Quick like heat behind glass. Then it vanished. Fine, he said. Look, she's not here. She's been unstable lately, he added. Emotional. You know how it is. That word again, used like a weapon. They moved toward the hog pen. The pigs surged forward, bodies pressing and shifting. Graham didn't even glance at them. Most farmers glance. Reflex. You check your animals. You look for injury, for broken boards, for anything that might cost you money. Graham walked past as if he didn't want to see. Marlowe asked casually if the animals had been acting strange. Graham said no. Said coyotes spooked them sometimes. Then the K9 unit arrived. A handler, a German shepherd, a leash that tightened as the dog tasted the air. Marlowe gave the handler a quick briefing. Missing woman. Last seen here. Personal items recovered. Concern for foul play. Graham snapped. You told them foul play? Marlowe didn't blink. I told them we're looking for her. The handler asked for a scent item. Marlowe held up the scarf, bagged. Graham's eyes locked on it. Something flickered there, brief but real. The dog sniffed the scarf and began. It moved in a quick sweep at first, then slowed near the spot where Nolan had found the phone. The dog circled, nose tight to the ground, then moved toward the hog barn and stopped abruptly. It froze, tail stiff. Head low, body braced. The handler murmured, almost under his breath. Marlowe stepped closer. What's it doing? Alerting, the handler said. Something's here. Graham cut in. That's where the hogs are. Of course it smells like animals. The handler didn't look up. Animals don't make this dog freeze like that. Marlowe made her decision. She sent Nolan to request a search warrant. She told Graham to stay put. She told the handler to hold position. Graham smiled, thin and sharp. You don't have anything, he said. Not yet. They had objects? A phone, a shoe, a scarf, a house that looked lived in but not lived in enough, a supply room that had been scrubbed too hard, a dog that refused to step deeper. And they had a man whose calm didn't fit the moment. Nolan looked back once as he walked to his cruiser. The hogs had quieted slightly, almost as if they were listening too. The wet rhythm never stopped. And Nolan understood, with a slow certainty, that whatever had happened to Maya Hart had happened close. Not on a highway, not in another town, not in a random accident. Close enough that the land still held it, close enough that the animals still moved around it. Close enough that a man like Graham Keller could stand in the yard and insist calmly that she had simply walked away. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. The warrant did not arrive with drama. It arrived the way most rural warrants do, by phone calls, signatures, and a judge pulled away from dinner. Missing woman. Last known location, Keller Farm. Personal effects recovered. K9 alert. Signs of recent cleaning consistent with concealment. Subject present. Statements inconsistent. The judge asked one question, the kind that turns routine into urgency. Do you believe she's in danger? Yes, Marlowe said. That was enough. When the approval came through, it did not feel like relief. It felt like permission to step into something that was already pressing against the door. Marlowe gathered the team. Nolan, the K9 handler, Deputy Lila Benton. 2 more units were en route, but rural time is different. For now, it was a handful of people and a property that suddenly felt too large. Graham Keller stood near his truck, arms crossed, watching them like a homeowner watching strangers track mud onto a clean floor. Marlowe read the warrant aloud. Not to educate him. To record him? Graham's jaw worked as if he were chewing something bitter. You're making a mistake, he said. Marlowe didn't argue. We'll see. They started with the hog barn. Body cameras on. Red lights blinking. A soft hum of recording that made every breath feel documented. The barn door opened with a reluctant scrape. Warm air rolled out, thick with ammonia and wet straw. The hogs surged toward the sound, snouts pressed between bars, hungry and irritated. The dog hesitated. It moved forward stiffly, nose low, as if it didn't want to touch what it already knew. Nolan swept his light across the concrete. Mud. Straw. Feed dust. No obvious pooling. No bright red. Nothing cinematic. Then his beam caught a scuff mark. A long smear, darker than the surrounding grime, as if something heavy had been dragged. Marlowe crouched, careful not to touch. The smear had direction. Toward the supply room. The disinfectant smell hit harder there. It didn't belong in that concentration. It was the smell of someone trying to overwrite reality. The dog traced the scrubbed swirls on the floor and sat, alert. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost reluctant. Marlowe lowered her voice. "We expand!" They moved into a narrow service corridor behind the pens. One buzzing bulb. Metal everywhere. Hogs loud on the other side, their bodies slamming lightly into rails as they shifted. Halfway down, Nolan saw a small hatch low to the wall. Fresh scratches around it. New screws, bright against old paint. Marlowe stared at the screws like they were an answer that had been installed recently. "Why would you replace these?" she murmured. Graham's voice came too fast from behind them. "Maintenance." Marlowe didn't turn. "You didn't mention maintenance." "It's my farm," he snapped. "I don't have to mention everything." Marlowe faced him in that tight corridor, the hog noise rising around them. "No," she said. "You don't. But it helps when you're telling the truth." She turned back to the hatch. "Document. Then open." Nolan photographed the screws, the scratches, the edge. Lila stood back with an evidence bag ready, her hands trembling. When Nolan put the screwdriver to the first screw, the sound cut through the barn noise in a way that made everyone tense. He loosened them one by one. The hatch plate shifted. A smell leaked out. Not manure. Not disinfectant. Something trapped and sweet in the wrong way, like rot sealed in damp concrete. Nolan's body reacted before his mind could frame it. Stomach clench. Mouth watering. A sudden need to step back and breathe clean air. Lila turned her face away and swallowed hard, fighting her reflex. Marlowe didn't move. "Open it." Nolan lifted the hatch. Below was a narrow pit, part of the waste system. Concrete walls slick, standing liquid dark and opaque. The flashlight beam reflected back, dull, as if the light itself didn't want to stay there. Something pale floated near the edge. For a second, Nolan's brain tried to label it as foam. Plastic. Anything that wasn't human. Then the shape resolved. A hand. Or what remained of one. The dog whined softly, low, uncomfortable. Lila stumbled back into the wall, palm over her mouth. For a moment, nobody spoke. The hogs continued their constant movement, indifferent to the fact that a line had been crossed. Marlowe broke the silence. "Step back. Nobody touches anything. Nolan, call it in. This is a homicide scene." Nolan keyed his radio with shaking fingers. "Dispatch. We have human remains. Request state investigators. Medical examiner. Now." Behind them, Graham Keller went very still. Nolan turned and watched his face. Color drained. Eyes fixed on the open hatch. Mouth slightly open like he'd been caught mid-breath. For 1 second, something human surfaced. Not grief. Not remorse. Panic. Then it shut down. The mask slid back into place. Marlowe spoke, voice calm and flat. "Graham Keller, you're being detained." "I didn't," Graham started. "That's not, I don't know what that is." Marlowe didn't argue. Nolan stepped forward with cuffs. Graham backed up half a step, then another. "Get away from me," he said, and his control cracked. His voice went sharp. "You can't just—" Nolan grabbed his wrist. Graham twisted, trying to pull free. Boots scraped. Metal rails rattled. The hogs reacted instantly. They surged, squealing, slamming into the bars. Chaos rose like a wave. Marlowe moved in. Efficient. Practiced. Together, she and Nolan forced Graham's arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked. Graham fought for a moment, not like a man grieving, but like a man trying to keep his story alive. As if resisting could keep the hatch from having been opened. Then his shoulders sagged. The fight left him in a sudden drop. They led him outside. Cold air hit them like a reset. The yard felt unreal under the stars, as if the night was trying to pretend it had always been this quiet. Graham sat on the bumper of a cruiser, cuffed hands between his knees. Nolan stood close, watching his face for anything that resembled remorse. Graham stared at the ground. His lips moved. Nolan leaned in, expecting a confession. "He wasn't supposed to call you," Graham whispered. Nolan's skin prickled. "Who?" Graham blinked slowly as if he'd spoken by accident. Marlowe stepped closer. "Who wasn't supposed to call us, Graham?" Graham looked up, and for a second there was hatred in his eyes. Not panic. Not grief. The cold resentment of someone whose plan had been interrupted. "She did this," he said. "She left. She wanted attention. Marlowe cut him off with one word. "Stop." No yelling. No theatrics. Just an end. Inside the barn, the hogs were still unsettled, still loud, still moving with that constant wet rhythm. Nolan looked toward the far corner of the pen line, toward dark, trampled ground. It wasn't only the hatch. It was the whole place. A farm is built to process life into product and waste into disappearance. Out here, systems exist to remove what is inconvenient. And in this moment, Nolan understood the turning point wasn't the discovery. It was the intent behind the environment. Maya Hart hadn't vanished. She had been processed. Through concrete, through metal, through a system designed to make things disappear. Accidents are messy and loud. This wasn't. This was method. As state vehicles turned onto the gravel lane, their headlights sweeping over the yard, Nolan watched Graham Keller stare toward the barns. Not at the deputies. Not at the road. At the doors. As if he was afraid of what else might be found if people kept opening them. Chapter 5. Fallout and Discovery. The farm changed the moment the state vehicles arrived. Conus. Tape. Clipboards. White suits. Evidence markers planted into dirt like small flags. A crime scene technician stepped into the barn wearing protective coveralls that crackled with movement. Another unrolled metal cases on a tailgate like surgical instruments. The medical examiner's team came last, faces neutral, eyes trained not to flinch. Graham Keller was moved into the back of a cruiser. The door closed with a clean final sound. Through the glass, Graham sat upright, breathing measured, staring straight ahead. He looked like a man waiting at a counter. Sergeant Marlowe didn't let that image soften anything. She called the prosecutor and locked the legal steps into place. Emergency hold. Proper chain of custody. Every document clean. Every decision defensible. Rural cases can unravel fast. One mistake becomes a loophole. One sloppy sentence becomes a headline that eats the truth. Marlowe wanted none of that. Back at the sheriff's office, Elena Hart had been told to wait. She sat beneath fluorescent lights in a room that smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee. A vending machine hummed like background noise in a place designed for bad news. When the call finally came, it wasn't the words that broke her. It was the tone. Marlowe didn't say, "We found her." She said, "Elena, I need you to come in and sit with someone." That was how Elena knew. Because nobody asks you to sit with someone for good news. Elena drove too fast. Hands locked on the wheel. Jaw clenched so tight it ached. She walked into the lobby and saw how people avoided her eyes. That small, human instinct to step away from the edge of someone else's grief. Marlowe guided her into a private room. Nolan stayed outside, hearing only muffled voices and careful pauses, the sound of a life breaking quietly. Elena's grief didn't come as a scream. It came as questions. How do you know it's her? Can I see her? What did he do? Marlowe answered with what she could. Facts that were incomplete. Language that avoided cruelty. Promises about thoroughness and process. When Elena came out, her face looked drained and unfamiliar, as if someone had erased a part of it. She looked at Nolan not like a deputy, but like a person attached to the last place her sister had been alive. Did she suffer? Elena asked. Nolan's throat tightened. He didn't know. No one did yet. And it would have been easy to lie, to give comfort he couldn't prove. He didn't. I don't know, he said. I'm sorry. Elena nodded once. Like she expected that. Like uncertainty had been living in her for months, and now it had only changed shape. At the farm, technicians worked through the night. They photographed every corner of the barn. They swabbed surfaces that had been scrubbed too hard. They collected and cataloged the paper towels stiff with dried stains. The cleaning products, the gloves, the little details people forget when they think they are being careful. Someone found a tiny brass key hidden inside a boot upstairs. Marlowe stared at it in an evidence bag. "Who hides a key in a boot?" she asked quietly. Nolan didn't answer, but he understood the question. People hide keys when they control access. When daylight finally came, the farm looked less like a stage and more like what it had always been: a working place, dirt under everything, systems built for efficiency. And that was what made it worse. Because the same efficiency that keeps a farm running can also make harm easier to conceal. At the sheriff's office, Graham Keller was interviewed in a small room that smelled like stale air and disinfectant. A camera blinked red in the corner, recording. Marlowe sat across from him with a folder of photographs turned face down. Graham's wrists were cuffed to a ring on the table. He stared at the cuffs more than he stared at her. "What am I being charged with?" he asked. "Homicide investigation," Marlowe said. "Charges depend on what we confirm." Graham's mouth twitched. "You found something. That doesn't mean it's her." Marlowe flipped the folder and slid out a photo of Maya's cracked phone sealed in plastic. "You told me she left with her phone," Marlowe said. "That was false." Graham leaned back slightly. "Maybe she dropped it. Maybe I didn't notice." Marlowe slid out a photo of the scarf. "You told me she didn't take a bag. We recovered her personal items. You didn't call her sister. You didn't call hospitals. You didn't call us. You didn't even pretend to look." Graham's eyes hardened. She didn't want to be found. The same story again and again. Marlowe leaned forward just enough to make the air feel smaller. "This is the part where you decide what kind of person you want to be on record as," she said. Graham stared at her. "I'm already the person you decided I am." Marlowe's voice stayed calm. "No, I'm the person looking at evidence." She asked him what the argument was really about. Graham breathed in through his nose, slow. "She wanted to leave," he said finally. "She kept talking about leaving." Marlowe let the words sit. "And you didn't want her to," she said. Graham looked up fast. "I didn't say that." "You said she wanted to leave," Marlowe replied. Most people hear that and they get scared. They ask why. They don't scrub concrete. They don't hide keys. They don't let a woman's phone sit cracked in dirt. Graham's shoulders rose and fell. Then he said it, quieter, like a truth slipping out because he couldn't hold it down. "She was going to ruin me." That sentence was a window. Because ruin is a word that lives in the mind of someone who thinks relationships are transactions. Someone who thinks love is possession, and possession is reputation. Graham said Maya threatened to tell people he was controlling, that she felt trapped, that she talked about recording him. Marlowe watched his face when he said trapped. Not shame, insult, as if being described accurately was the real crime. Nolan and another deputy went to Maya's duplex with Elena's consent. They documented her room, her planner, the half-folded laundry, the tidy routines that had been left mid-motion. On Maya's desk, in a notebook, Nolan found a line written heavier than the rest. "If I don't answer, it's because he's there." It wasn't proof of murder. It was proof of fear. They pulled phone records. The pattern was unmistakable. Clusters of calls. Texts that escalated from "Where are you?" to "Answer me now" to "Don't make me come get you." Marlowe looked at the printouts and said one quiet sentence. "That's coercion." Then softer, "That's a countdown." They spoke to people around town. A waitress remembered Maya asking if the diner still had a payphone. A coworker remembered Maya flinching at vibrations, then smiling too brightly. A neighbor remembered a truck idling outside the duplex late at night with its lights off. Small pieces. Together a portrait. A woman shrinking. A man mistaking shrinking for loyalty. A state investigator, Agent Naomi Vance, reviewed everything and asked the question that mattered. "Where did he think he could hide her?" Nolan answered without thinking. "In the system." Vance nodded. "Because criminals who use environments like farms often don't think of themselves as violent. They think of themselves as practical. They see the world as machinery, inputs and outputs, problems and solutions. They don't feel guilt the way you expect. They feel inconvenience. That was what Graham had shown the whole time. Inconvenience. Identification was confirmed through forensic work and personal effects. Charges solidified. Public statements were made carefully, without details that would turn Maya's death into spectacle. Elena watched the press conference from her living room, her cat pressed against her leg like it sensed she might disappear too. When the prosecutor said the victim, Elena whispered, "Her name is Maya." Later, Marlowe visited Elena, not in uniform. She brought paperwork, resources, and the weight of a duty she could not complete. Elena asked one question that didn't belong on a form. "Did he ever love her?" Marlowe paused. "I think he loved what she gave him," she said. Quiet. Compliance. A life that didn't challenge him. Elena's mouth trembled. "So he didn't love her." Marlowe didn't correct her. Some truths don't need polishing. The farm sat behind tape for weeks. Animals sold, moved, dispersed. The property slowly emptied out like a body losing heat. In town, people spoke in lower voices. They looked at their own relationships differently. They wondered what had been happening behind familiar fences. Because the worst part of cases like this isn't the discovery. It's the realization that it didn't happen in a distant city or a shadowy alley. It happened on a familiar road, under a sky everyone shared. It happened because one person believed another person's life could be managed like livestock and equipment, kept, contained, and disposed of when it became inconvenient. And once that belief is revealed, it doesn't stay contained. It changes the way a whole town listens to silence. Chapter 6. The Ending. The trial did not bring clarity. It rarely does. It brought structure. Timelines. Exhibits. Photographs projected onto screens that were too clean and too bright for what they showed. Words like procedure and system repeated until they lost their edges. Graham Keller sat at the defense table in a pressed shirt, hair trimmed, posture controlled. From a distance, he could have been mistaken for a man enduring a terrible misunderstanding. That illusion mattered, because the defense did not deny Maya was dead. That door had closed. Instead, they argued ambiguity. Accident. Panic. They suggested the farm was dangerous, that systems failed. That tragedy doesn't always require intent. And they said Maya had been unstable. Elena sat behind the prosecution table, hands folded, eyes forward. She didn't cry in the courtroom. She had done her crying already, alone, in rooms where nobody watched. What she watched now were details. How Graham avoided looking at photographs. How he corrected his attorney under his breath. How his jaw tightened when Maya's messages were read aloud. Messages where she asked for space. Messages where she said she was afraid. Messages where she said she wanted to leave. The prosecution didn't lean on shock. They leaned on choices. They laid out the timeline. The last known sighting. The lack of outgoing communication. The cleaning. The lies. The attempt to turn absence into a woman's decision. The prosecutor used one sentence that stayed in the room like smoke. He made a series of choices that removed her options. Because violence is not always an explosion. Sometimes it is an administrative act. A series of steps. A process. The jury deliberated less than a day. When they returned, the courtroom stood. The verdict was read without drama. Guilty. On all counts. Elena felt something then. Not relief, not closure. Just a hollow quiet, like the moment after a machine finally stops running and you realize how loud it had been the whole time. At sentencing, Graham spoke. He did not apologize. He said he loved Maya. He said he was misunderstood. He said he never meant for things to go that far. Elena didn't look at him. When it was her turn, she stood with a piece of paper in her hand and didn't read from it. "My sister was not mysterious," she said. She was not fragile. She was careful because she learned that care keeps you alive. She paused. She trusted someone who treated trust like ownership. That was all. The judge sentenced Graham Keller to life without parole. A gavel came down. The room exhaled, and still something remained unfinished. Because punishment answers only one question. What happens to the person who did this? It does not answer the question that lingers longer. How did everyone miss it? In the months that followed, the farm was sold. The barns were emptied, then torn down. New fencing went up. Grass grew where concrete had been. People drove past and tried not to think about what had been there. Elena moved away. Not far. Just far enough to breathe without hearing the town's quiet judgment in every grocery aisle. She took Maya's cat with her. She kept the scarf. She kept the planner. She kept the notebook with that one line written heavier than the rest. If I don't answer, it's because he's there. Sometimes late at night, Elena replayed conversations in her head. Jokes, shrugs. The "I'm fine" said too quickly. The smiles that arrived late. The way Maya used to check her phone, then set it down like it burned. She wondered how many times Maya had stood at a threshold, doorway, car, sentence, and almost said more. And she wondered how many people heard the hesitation and filled it in with comfort instead of concern. The town changed subtly. People asked more questions. They checked on sisters more often. They stopped calling control particular. They learned slowly that danger doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it wears routine. Sometimes it lives in familiar places. Sometimes it hides in systems designed to make things disappear. Maya Hart did not disappear. She was removed. And remembering that difference matters, because disappearance suggests absence without cause. Removal requires a decision, a hand, a moment where someone decides another life is an obstacle. The ending of this story is not loud. There is no final image that resolves everything. There is only the knowledge that Maya existed, that her fear was reasonable, and that silence is not the same as peace. And if this story unsettles you, it should. Not because of what happened on a farm under a dark sky, but because of how quietly it almost worked. Thank you for staying with Midnight Fatal Cases. If this story affected you, take a moment before moving on. Cases like this aren't just about crime. They're about silence, control, and the warning signs people often notice too late. If you want more true crime told carefully and without sensationalism, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories focused on truth, not shock. And if you feel able, leave a comment below. What stood out to you in this case? Do you think something could have been noticed sooner? Your perspective matters. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next case. Thank you for staying with Midnight Fatal Cases.